welcome everyone to the presentation tonight. Thank you so much for joining us. I hope you can hear me clearly.
Yeah, you're good.
Good to go? Okay, great.
Yep.
So, crisis communications has always been a hot topic, and with the rise of social media, it definitely makes things more urgent, more time sensitive. So it's it's a current topic of discussion, and whenever you're part of a big event or really any part of any organization nowadays, you need a crisis comms plan, and you definitely need to integrate social media in there. So I'm going to touch a little bit about social media, but also just about crisis communications in general, because typically social media really is one part of an overall plan. So this is what we're going to be chatting about tonight. Just an overview here. So the definition of a crisis, it can be different for every organization, but it does have some common traits. What makes social media different when it comes to crisis communications? So how does social media affect the way you communicate with people, the way people communicate with your organizations, the different channels that they use? And then we're looking at how can you prepare for something. Crisis communications usually strikes organizations the most. They are caught off guard the most when they aren't prepared. And the more work you can do in preparation for a crisis, the better off you'll be when it strikes. Then we're going to look at how you can respond to a crisis using the prep work and the information you gather. And then I've gathered just a couple of resources, but happy to share more at the end. And then we're going to open it up to questions. Okay, so I apologize that the slides are a bit text heavy, but I thought they'd be great as a reference and a resource for you after my presentation. As I mentioned earlier, a crisis is different depending on the organization you're in. It's basically defined as a major unforeseen event with serious results, and it can come in many forms. There are lots of examples that I'm going to use throughout the presentation. Some might seem quite minor, some might seem quite controversial, some you may never heard of, and some you have heard a lot about. So it can come in the form of an accident, unprovoked attack, a natural disaster, could be a weather incident if you're putting on a major outdoor event, or an event that requires people to get to your event on time if the weather is affecting their travel plans. Okay, so even this little snafu could be considered a crisis, really. Major unforeseen event with serious, well, not too serious because we were able to come back in, but something you're not necessarily prepared for or you're not looking forward to having, and something that kind of disrupts the flow of what you're trying to accomplish, whether that's through an event or a game or a meeting or what have you. And regardless of scale, most organizations face some form of crisis in their lifetime. So unfortunately, it's something, again, that it's best to prepare for, but sometimes you just can't foresee that an event will happen. It may affect the whole organization, or it might just affect one particular area. However, there are common traits to a crisis, and these are typically the ones. So it starts with a trigger. There's definitely a sense of urgency or panic and a sense of being out of control. The trigger is threatening to the organization, and the organization must take specific action to end the crisis. So when I think about something that happened for us during the Canada Games, we experienced particularly warm temperatures during the games and had worked very hard to ensure that our outdoor speed skating rink for long track speed skating was prepared for the weather conditions. Unfortunately, despite our very best efforts, because we did not have a refrigerated rink, the temperatures rose to the point of, after day one of competition, we weren't able to host long track speed skating at our outdoor facility anymore. We were lucky that we'd prepared everything in advance and actually flew up our athletes to Fort St. John, to a phenomenal indoor long track speed skating facility that they have there. and we were able to accommodate them there for 4 days of competition. So that for us was something we were prepared for, but it was definitely a crisis in that we had to ensure that our communications was ready, that our messaging was ready, that all the operational details were in place, and we had volunteers and people up in Fort St. John that could accommodate the weather crises that we experienced. So what are some of the dimensions of a crisis? Your reputation is challenged, operations are compromised, credibility and trust in the organization or the person can be compromised, or the company. Behavior is questioned, professional expectations aren't met, ethics are questioned, and victims are produced. So again, this is definitely scalable. Some things, when you think about the BP oil spill, were on a massive scale of destruction and the impact that it had to people and natural resources, people's jobs, people's reputations, was on a massive scale. Something smaller might be, even just this evening, everything that you've put in place has been challenged. So people think, oh, well, were they prepared? Oh, well, things are just questioned slightly, even on the smallest scale. I experienced something recently through the city of Prince George. Prince George is actually on a hotbed of radon gas. It's naturally occurring, but I wasn't aware as a homeowner in Prince George, and I heard a news story on CBC. So there was the trigger, and then that in me raised a sense of slight panic and questioning what the situation, what it would mean for me, what it would mean for my house price, and what it would mean for the health of my family. And so, of course, then you take to social media to find out where the impetus for the story came from, and to typically, that's also where you can find a lot of people's contact information is on social media. So if you're looking to find out more about the story, you're going to Google it. If you're trying to get in contact with people, you might try and find them on Twitter. So my question was, if the city knew this was naturally occurring, why didn't they let people in the area know that it was going to affect them? So you think about the city's reputation, you think about the trust, their credibility, and the behavior, and why people weren't made aware of this before it became a national news story. So then you think about ethics, and I guess you could say that on a very small scale, we felt victimized, that our needs weren't taken into consideration. So I mentioned social media. That's part of the title of this discussion, and you think about what's different in the age of social media. Well, obviously, as I mentioned in my last slide, the accessibility. Social media makes people accessible, and in your organization, if you have social media assets, and a lot of people set them up as a way to communicate outwardly to their population. So you think of setting up a Facebook page or a Twitter account or an Instagram account, and your first thought is, well, I'm going to communicate out. But you're actually opening up the lines of communication, a direct line of communication to you, which is very public. And when a crisis occurs, you're exposing yourself, really, to the general public. Almost all conversations are public when somebody posts to your wall or communicates with you on Twitter. I'm using those as examples because they are the most common ones that organizations are using. And you can direct message, but typically people don't. So the other thing that's, of course, we're all very aware of is just the rapid information flow and how easily content can be shared. So I can click a link and copy and paste it and share it to, I don't know, however many friends, 250 friends that I might have on Facebook. Or I could, let's say I've got 4,000 followers. I can put a posting up there or click a link or share information through social media about an issue that I'm conscious of or concerned about, and really sort of call out those organizations on Twitter publicly, and that's what a lot of people have been doing. There's also texting. Texting is not necessarily a social media, traditional social media, but it's definitely a way that people can quickly communicate. And when you think about how active parents are in different sports, texting and social media are really a great way for them to communicate, and it's really a quick way for them to share information. The other thing that can be a little bit that you have to be cautious about with social media is just the propensity for rumor and misinformation. So that just means that you have to ensure that you get in front of the discussion and you share as much information as you can as quickly as you can, just to ensure that people are informed, and so the information they're passing on is correct information. I think when a crisis occurs to you and you have a lot of people questioning you and looking for answers and looking for information, it's easy to get defensive, and it's easy for people to be concerned about the information that they may be sharing. I think it's always best to think that the people who are coming to you for information have the best intention. They just want to be informed. And whether that's the media or a parent, the most upfront, timely response you can give them with the most information that you have, and you might not have all the information within 10 minutes of the incident occurring, but as much information as you can share, you should try and share, and that will ensure that the information that's shared is accurate. So this is a great quote, that social media is an instigator, an accelerator, and can be an extinguisher. And when you think about somebody like Jian Ghomeshi, for example, as soon as he was accused, he himself actually took to his Facebook wall and wrote probably a 4-paragraph defense of his situation that many people immediately extinguished the questioning of his behavior initially. So he recognized that if he got out in front of the issue and confronted it and posted what he obviously felt was the truth in his defense, I guess, that extinguished a lot of the rumors and innuendo that was out there. Of course, we know now that there's much more to the story, but that is part of social media, is that basically whoever gets there first has a bit of an advantage. It's kind of like soccer. First to the ball has the advantage, or hockey too, I guess. Okay, so it's funny because when we think about crisis, many people jump to what's our response going to be? Well, actually, the best response comes with a prepared response, and there's a lot of work you can do in preparation for a crisis or an issue. And the best thing about prep work is if you get to it early, you're able to complete a lot, probably 90% of the work that needs to be done for a crisis. You can complete it on your own time with approval processes in place, with the information you're dealing with, and without a stressful crisis situation. So my recommendation is, regardless of the size of your organization, you yourself or whoever's in the communications position with your organization gathers together the decision makers in your organization and does some prep work. So there's a lot of stuff you can do to make sure your organization is ready for a crisis. And start with an in-house risk assessment. We just did one recently at VIA Sport, actually, and it was really beneficial because we came to the realization that some of our work is done by third-party organizations. So we need to ensure that all of the work that is done cooperatively, and we work closely with them to ensure that all of the work is done consistently and to standard. So you might have the same type of situation where you have volunteers who are doing programs or classes with children. You might have parents who are allowed, or you might have parents who are allowed or not allowed in certain areas of the arena. And you might have or not have a cell phone or a camera policy in change rooms. That's something you might want to think about. a discipline process or a hazing policy for teams. Code of conduct, of course, is probably a given, but it's always helpful to reevaluate these types of things. And look at the discipline processes that are in place. Are they realistic? Would they be easy to carry out? You can even put your organization through a really quick emergency operations scenario where you make up a scenario that's really likely to happen, and then you go through this preparedness plan. And we'll go through a little bit about how you can be more prepared. Then complete the work that's generated from that assessment. So you might uncover things that are very surprising to you that you just weren't prepared for. Maybe you don't have a photography sign-off form for all of the children who are taking minor hockey classes, and that's a must. So you would definitely want all of your, if there's going to be video or photos taken at the hockey rink or arena, you might want them to ensure that they're all signing photo consent forms. Those are just some of the things that if you go through all of your organizational weaknesses, you could uncover some work that could be done in preparation for a crisis. And then review it annually because it just helps you feel prepared. All right, a couple of other things. So think about your communications capacity. You could potentially have a very low communications capacity. Maybe you're relying on volunteers. Maybe you have one staff. Maybe you have a shared staff. Maybe you have a parent or somebody helping you out. So think about what's your capacity and then review your communications outlets. What is your typical way of getting in touch with your general public, and who is your main audience? Is it parents? Is it volunteers? Is it media? Do you ever communicate with the media? And then think about what types of tactics you use to communicate. And typically we do almost only ever think about communicating out. So how do you communicate out? Do you have a newsletter? Is it monthly, weekly? Do you have an email list of all of your members and all of your athletes and their parents? There are great programs like MailChimp and Campaigner where you can actually create lists in advance, and then you can send out one email and it goes to everybody. Do you have Twitter and Facebook? A lot of organizations don't, or you might just have one. And if you do have one, how often is it? You should check how many followers you have and how often do you use it. Are people really engaged? Are they commenting? Are they liking photos? If they aren't, and you can check Facebook analytics to see if people are engaged. If they aren't really engaged with your Twitter account or your Facebook account, then in a crisis, you don't want to use these as your main modes of communication because obviously you're not reaching your whole audience. How updated and current is your media list? Media are notorious for really high turnover rates. So if you do have a relationship with one or more media outlets in your community, that can really come in handy in the event of a crisis because they will be your biggest proponent of sharing accurate information. They are very diligent though, and so they will come to you for information, but yeah, it's really helpful to have great relationships with media. And then some people, do you have a website, and how quickly and easily can you update it? So a lot of organizations have a website that only maybe 1 or 2 people can update. If that's the case, that you need to make sure that in a crisis they're available to help you update your website with information. Finally, your phone. You can actually, if you have an answering machine service on your phone, in the event of a crisis, you could update that message and say, for example, the arena will be closed because we have our Zamboni broke down, or our refrigeration service is now broken. For more information, visit our website. And then there are texting services available. One our school uses called Remind that actually sends out notifications, and that could be another way that you can communicate with your public. So figure out what you are currently using, and then make sure that in the event of a crisis, it can be utilized or not. Again, so what's your capacity for communicating outwards and for listening? Because in the event of a crisis, you're going to have to be on call to listen and respond when people have questions. And then internally, who needs to be on a list? Who are your key stakeholder groups that need to know if a crisis is occurring? We recommend using a phone tree. Email could be a permanent record or a paper trail if there is something really serious happening. Phone tree is always really helpful, but again, it takes much more effort. So you just need to be prepared to maintain that. Who will be your media spokesperson? You might have somebody on hand who has media training, or you might not. It doesn't need to be your CEO or your ED or your GM. It doesn't. You could have a spokesperson who represents your association, who isn't. That person just needs to be understanding, caring. It shows emotion and really shows empathy. And the best example of that I can give you is the video apology from Maple Leaf Foods. When they had their major crisis go down, you can Google Maple Leaf Foods apology and listen to their CEO's apology. It is heartfelt and genuine, and really, really, I have a friend who worked on the Reputational Index project, and it showed that because of him as a person and the way he communicated with the public, it had a very positive effect on their reputation. And then make sure that you connect with Hockey BC or Hockey Canada, depending on the severity of the crisis. They definitely would be there to support you and help you, I'm sure, and they would certainly want to be informed if something negative happened. So how do you respond in a crisis? As I mentioned, when a crisis hits, again, depending on the severity, it can really shake and rattle you. You think about something like the death that the 2010 Olympics experienced on their opening day before the games had even begun. I don't know if you had the opportunity to listen to John Furlong speak, but he often refers to that incident and how they addressed it. And he basically stopped everything that day, went to the site, visited the volunteers, ensured that people got the help they needed, really took the time just to make sure that people were cared for, because it was such a horrific incident. And he was able to do that because he had a great communications team in place who were able to deal with all of the media scrums and the press conferences that had to be put together and all the messaging and all the communication that had to go out there. So if you've got a great plan in place, then it'll definitely relieve you of some of that stress when the crisis occurs. So these are a few of the potential minor hockey issues you might face. Obviously, I'm sure there are more, that even things like, let's say you have the provincials in your community and you've run out of places for people to stay, or the refrigeration breaks down in your hockey arena. These are the weather. Let's say the weather prevents teams from arriving on time. These are crises that range from less severe to much more severe, and you just need to have operational and communications plans in place to deal with them. So during a crisis, this is what people want to know. They want to know the most updated and accurate information. And as I mentioned before, if you don't know much, let people know that. Tell them what you can. Let them confirm that, yes, the refrigeration has broken in our facility. We have people on site who are working on it, and we will let you know within the hour what the update is. So think about that situation. The media are looking for that information. Parents of your athletes are looking for that information. Volunteers who are helping with the event are looking for that information. And they're all sharing that information. So as accurate and as timely as you can be with your response, and consistent with your updates, the better off you'll be. Practical and spiritual guidance. So they're just looking for information on what they should do next. So if I was planning on attending this tournament, do I show up for the 9 o'clock game, or has it been suspended for 15 minutes or 2 hours? If you've got information on your website, you're going to want to update that. If you have a Facebook account, you want to update your Facebook wall. This is if you have media on site, you want to share that information with media. If you use a texting program, you want to send out that push notification through text. They're looking for reassurance that things are going to be okay in the event of a flood or a fire. People know it's severe. They know that there's no one to blame, that it's a natural occurrence, but they just want to know that things are going to be okay, that people are going to be on site, they're going to be looked after, and yeah, it's going to work its way out one way or another. And then, as I mentioned earlier, deliver by able and compassionate spokespeople. And the other thing that's really important is people want to know there's a plan for solving the issue or the crisis. That, again, you might not know what the plan is now, you're working on it, and as soon as you know what that plan is, you communicate that. Okay, so again, when you're thinking about responding to a crisis, you want to take your audience groups and you want to divide them. So you have internal audience groups and you have external audience groups. And when I think about the minor hockey organizations, for example, the audience could be staff, volunteers, and board. I'm sure if you think about your own organizational structure, you might have more people that you would add to this audience list, but it really helps to break the audiences in half to internal and external, and then list who those audiences are, because you probably communicate to volunteers differently than you would to board. If you have an organization like the 2015 Canada Winter Games, where we had 4,500 volunteers and 10 board members, we're going to send out an email to each board member or potentially phone them. For volunteers, we're going to send out our text through our text remind system that sends a push notification. However, our volunteers were also 50% of them were considered seniors or over 55, so not all of them had smartphones. So we had to be aware of that as well, and that made things a little more difficult for us. But we used an email system, phone tree. I know that sounds strange, but we would either call or email leads of teams, and then those people were responsible for informing their people on site. You can send email updates to staff. You might have an intranet or a closed Facebook wall. That's a great opportunity to communicate with people. You could put Q&As up there. It also really helps to inform your internal stakeholder groups. So again, they can be advocates for what's happening, and they can communicate truths to your public. And then again, inform Hockey BC, depending on the severity of the incident. And then externally, there's quite a bit more you can do here externally. And again, I'm thinking of your situation. You might have parents, athletes, officials, media, fans. I'm sure the list could be larger. Check emails. So the other very important thing to do during a crisis is to listen. And that might take a little bit of searching on social media sites or on the web, but it's actually relatively easy to find out information about people who are talking about either your organization or your situation. So check your email. I recommend having a generic email that is not connected to one person in particular. It's not one person's personal email, but it is checked regularly. And if you know there's a crisis or an incident, ensure that you have somebody who is dedicated to having that email open as soon as the incident occurs. So it could be one day, or in the case of Volkswagen right now, I'm sure they have 4 people listening, no, not 400, not four people, sorry, but I'm sure they've got many people dedicated to checking their emails and answering emails and every other communication outlet that they have. Google Sites with keywords. So I just use here like No Name Hockey Club hazing scandal, or you could attach your community to that Google search. But Google search anything that you know might trigger you being able to find your incident online. And if you have local media, they're going to be talking about what's happening. So I'd also recommend going to their news sites, reading their articles, ensuring that they have accurate information in there. If they don't, you might want to develop a Q&A to send out just to media. Search in Twitter. There's a search bar at the bottom of Twitter that allows you to type in, similar to Google, you could type in keywords like No Name Hockey Club hazing scandal. Hashtags typically are just formed by people without your instigation. So, for example, with the Calgary floods, the hashtag YYC was used almost all the time. And people were making up hashtags like hashtag Calgary flood or hashtag, well, look at the Jays, for example, hashtag we're in it together. Hashtags can just sort of start by one person and be caught on like wildfire. So you might want to go on Twitter and see what people are already using on Twitter in terms of your incident. And then review your Facebook wall or the comment section of your posts, because you're going to get responses there. And if you can, turn on the notifications in your settings for Twitter and Facebook, because then you will know on your smartphone as soon as you get somebody who's communicating or commenting or asking a question on your social media posts. Don't forget to listen to traditional media too, because that is where people are going to go for the most reputable information. People know that social media can incite rumors and misinformation, so they're going to go to the media for the most accurate information, and to you. They're going to come to you first. So how are you going to deal with this crisis? Design specific roles and your messages. So agree together, and you can do this in advance. Depending on your crisis, agree proactively on what your messaging is going to be and develop those key messages. So have news releases and media advisories pre-written. This is quite easy to do. It's just a generic opening, and I can share with you through Sean some generic releases or media advisories where all you need to do at the time of the incident is put in current information. So this incident occurred at this time, this many people are affected, we don't have much more information, but we will be holding a press conference at this time, this place, and these people will be speaking. Have a media conference plan ready. So if you need AV there, if you need speaking notes written, make sure, you might not be able to write the speech in advance, but make sure the person who has to approve it is available to approve it in a timely way. Develop Q&As for your website and then link them to Twitter and Facebook or your blog. And then, as I mentioned before, just make sure people are on hand to approve and share with you the most pertinent information about the crisis, and then stay in touch with the key members of your organization to keep up to date. Make sure the roles are really clear before the crisis happens. So I might be a liaison to the media. I might have one of my coordinators be the internal liaison to find out all the stats and updates to information internally, and I might have another staff who's only responsible for listening and responding on all of our communication outlets. Respond in a timely, accurate, and consistent way. So be clear about when you're going to respond. Let's say it's within an hour. It could be by 12 o'clock, 3 o'clock, whatever. Be accurate. Even if you don't have any updates, let them know when they can hear from you next. Be realistic. Only communicate on the platforms you can manage. So you might have Twitter, you might have Facebook, you might have a website, you might have a phone system. if you feel you can only manage one, if people are just reaching out to you on every platform and it's too difficult to update them all, choose one platform and direct people to that platform. So let's say your biggest audience pre-crisis is your website. Most people, you can check your website's analytics. If you don't know, ask your web person to find out for you how many people are visiting your website, and then compare that to how many people are visiting your Facebook site or your Twitter, following you on Twitter. Maybe it's through email. Choose one platform that you're going to update the most regularly, and then use your other communications tactics to drive people to it. So, for example, one of the Halifax Canada Games, they had an issue with, I think it was bed bugs or something. So, of course, lots of really concerned athletes, parents, and they couldn't keep up on all their social media platforms. So what they did was they said, for all updates, please visit our website. And they just made all the updates on their website. They drove everyone to it. You might not have the capacity, so if you don't, just use the other platforms to communicate, tell people where they're going to find the information. And communicate with audiences on the platforms they're using. If they're using hashtags, use the same hashtag. If you want to communicate directly with them, use their tag to communicate directly. Twitter is a great place to communicate with media. You could easily say, at Nelson Daily Standard, we'll be sending out a press release in 15 minutes. Make sure to check your email. So it's a great way for you to communicate directly, and a lot of media are on Twitter. And then, as I mentioned before, expect people to share. Expect them to share your information, and assume that they have the best intentions. They want accurate info, and they want to be able to share it. They're going to retweet your tweets. They're going to create modified tweets based on some of the tweets you're sending out. They're going to copy and paste links or paragraphs or quotes from you. They can send that through text, email, on your smartphone. You can do it all. They might post your press release to their personal Facebook wall. You don't know how people are going to share your information, but expect that they will. Use hashtags to organize the communication feed. So, for example, if you wanted to be a part of the Blue Jays fan club that's out there right now, you would use the hashtag #ComeTogether. And when you do, your comment is going to show up in this one feed with all the comments about the Blue Jays. So check what the hashtags are that people are using about your organization and use those. Encourage people to tag you so you can respond. So as soon as they tag your organization on Twitter, you're going to get a notification that you were tagged directly. And then again, you can do things that are easy to share. You can design infographics. You can share photos with them. You can send links to maps. Let's say you had to redirect people, for example, from Prince George to Fort St. John. You could share photos of the new facility and get people excited about it. Turn a negative into a positive. You could share links to maps if you had to redirect a parade, for example. There are lots of things you can do. Update your website and share the link to the new blog post that you did about how you're handling the refrigeration issue. Create your own tweets. There's lots of things you can do to have people share your content. Internally, some of the roles and responsibilities that your team could undertake, and as I mentioned, you don't need to have a big team. They could be volunteers. Have one person who's in charge of the communication, whoever they are, and then I've got 2 others here, but you could have 3, 4. You can handle all the communication yourself if you're prepared to, and if it's manageable. They're all integrated, and in a crisis, you have to ensure that you're communicating on a regular basis with key people within your organization. And the manager would probably do all the approvals. They could be responsible to these people, and these are the tactics that they could do. Key messages, briefing notes, press releases, advisories. They could handle the tough phone calls. External communications person could listen and respond externally. So they're dealing more with public stakeholders, parents, athletes. They could be sending out email blasts. They could monitor your email and respond. They could look at traditional social media monitoring. And they just keep the comms manager up to date and saying, okay, you know what, we went through a negative spell here. It's looking positive now. Or we've got a lot of misinformation out there about this element of the crisis or the issue, so let's develop some Q&As that are going to mitigate some of the rumors and innuendo that's going on out there. Internal communications, listening and responding internally. So if you've got staff, board, volunteers, even really key sponsors that you want to make sure have the most pertinent info, then this internal comms person can ensure that they're kept up to date. And I just wanted to review this slide one more time. This is really important to keep in mind. This is the information that people are looking for during a crisis, and that's why I'm reviewing it at the end of the presentation. They want immediate and accurate info. They want it to be consistently updated. They want to know what they should do next. It was incredible when I heard the chief of police present on the Calgary floods, and I actually included a link on the next slide, a case study on social media used during the floods. And they had, and this is another thing too that it's hard to control, the city of Calgary was communicating, then their mayor, who is very prolific on Twitter, took to his own Twitter account and tweeted out all the information. And then they had a whole bunch of break-off groups who were able to provide guidance to people who wanted to help put sandbags out on roads or donate clothing and food to shelters. And all of these break-off groups are fantastic, but again, you really want to try and ensure that there's a lot of integration, and that happens on a large-scale incident. But people typically are coming to you for info and looking for guidance. They want to be reassured that things are going to be okay, maybe not immediately, but the outcome will be all right. And maybe that means that discipline occurs. They want to know that that's going to happen, or maybe they want to ensure that safety will be reestablished, or the event will happen at a later date. They just want to be reassured that it's going to happen, and they want it delivered by compassionate people, and they want to know what the end result will be. So here are a couple of resources that I've included here. There's tons of info on the web, some a bit more credible than others about crisis communications, but I've included just a couple here that are really easy to read and take in. And I think that is it for me.